Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Kayla and this is Dark Tales from the Road. Alright, hello everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I am so sorry in the delay of getting this episode out. I think I may get it out on time for Wednesday, but Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, it is late. It was supposed to be posted this morning. We had a super fun weekend. We went up to Whitefish, Montana for a wedding, stayed the whole weekend, and it was amazing. I thought I was shaking this cold off, but it does not seem to be wanting to let go. And it's like I'm going through it all over again, like it's back. So still stuffy, still have this cough. So hang in there with me. I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. So today I'm very excited. We're going back to a cemetery. We haven't done a cemetery since Stull Cemetery in Kansas. If you are a cemetery person, definitely go back and listen to that. You will love it. It's very spooky, and they say the portal to hell is there. So definitely check that one out. But today we're going to be going to Virginia. And I know there's a lot in Virginia that I could have done. So many conspiracies, so much history. But I picked this cemetery, because there was just something about it that I really liked. And I really wanted to put it out there because I've never heard of this cemetery before. And it definitely has some really good history and some haunting history. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to do, if you're new here, I do a little bit of history first because I love knowing about where we are in the United States, in the world, and discovering new places because we're in Richmond, Virginia, and I don't know a lot about Richmond. I grew up on the West, so I'm always up for learning more. If you don't want to listen to the history, go ahead and skip forward. Probably 15 minutes. I think that's my usual time. Sure. So, yeah, let's get started. So it is a short amount of history. I've cut it way down just to not overload the episode because I could talk for hours about the history and all this. So I have cut it down. It is not as much, and it's just kind of key facts from the history and then interesting facts and stuff like that. So Virginia, the history of Virginia goes back very, very, very far, as we all know, and it actually began in the 1500s when the Spanish came exploring over here. And the occupants at that time were different tribes, like the Algonquin, the Iroquoian, and Siouan. I hope I said that right. I'm sorry. I did practice, but I didn't look up how to say that one. But this was in the late 16th century. And Virginia was actually named in honor of Queen Elizabeth I because she was the Virgin Queen. So that's where Virginia came from. I'm obsessed with English royalty and Scottish and Ireland, that whole area. So if you don't know a lot about Queen Elizabeth I, I highly recommend it. There are movies out there also if you just want to do that, but her history is cool. That's I don't know how else to describe it. So Virginia has a nickname called the Old Dominion, and it was called that because it had some massive loyalty to King Charles II of England. So in a nutshell, Charles II was defeated in the Battle of Worcester. Was it that right? In 1651, and so he fled to Europe, and this thing says he became a virtual director of England, Scotland, and Ireland, which it makes me laugh because after everything we did with COVID and virtual and all that stuff, it's like, how the heck did they do that back then? But he spent 9 years in exile around France and the Spanish Netherlands and, Dutch country and all of that. But Virginia was big for King Charles. They had so much loyalty to him during the Puritan Commonwealth and the Protectorate. And the Puritan Commonwealth had a lot to do with the Church of England. The Puritans still were loyal to the Church of England, which, is a part of Charles II's monarchy. And then the Protectorate was a part of the Commonwealth also, and it's when England and Wales and Scotland and Ireland and all, English places overseas were governed by a Lord Protector, and it eventually got dissolved. It's I could go on, but I don't want to fill too much of it with that. But that's kind of what happened when Charles II was exiled. A man named Cromwell succeeded him and all this stuff. So it was a huge part of American history when Virginia was loyal to Charles II during all of this turmoil in England. There. So Virginia was one of the 13 colonies, obviously, and it was the first part of the country that was permanently settled by the English. And then they established Jamestown on the bank of the James River in 1607. John Smith, who we know well, and a lot of other colonists, including a man named John Rolfe, were some of those first settlers in Virginia. And John Rolfe actually became the husband of Pocahontas. And since Virginia was a part of the first English settlement, the state is known as the birthplace of a nation, quote unquote. And there's a lot of famous Virginians that really were the first contributors to, the United States, including, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and they were obviously, just go watch Hamilton, guys. If you haven't seen Hamilton, it's so, 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 so good. But yeah, part of that will help explain it. But they were, massive figures in the formation of the states. And it was actually known as the birthplace of presidents because it also included James Monroe, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Woodrow Wilson. During the Civil War, Richmond became the capital of the Confederacy, and actually more than half of the battles were fought in Virginia. Today, obviously we know many government institutions have their headquarters in Virginia. A huge part is Arlington, which is across the Potomac from D.C. Some other facts to note here, battlefields in Virginia were sites of surrenders that both ended the Revolutionary and Civil War. So the Yorktown was for the Revolutionary War and Appomattox for the Civil War. Virginia's had a very well-balanced economy, and it goes way beyond just agriculture. Since the 1960s, the state's economic productivity has been a lot higher than other states within the United States as a whole, which is pretty crazy. There's a huge technology sector that has expanded greatly since the late 20th century, and the federal government is a dominant economic presence in Virginia. There are also many military institutions, as well as the CIA, And with Virginia and the proximity to Washington, D.C., all of those have also contributed economically for them. Virginia is ranked among the top states in per capita distribution of federal funds and has one of the highest per capita incomes in the southern region. And last here, just a fun fact, the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg is the second oldest institution of higher education after Harvard. King William III and Queen Mary II of England signed a charter for its creation on February 8th, 1693, after Thomas Jefferson persuaded it to be the first law school, and that law school was established in 1779. So we're going to jump right into Richmond. This is the city we're going to be in today, which is also the capital of Virginia. The English first explored Richmond in 1607, and it was led by a man named Christopher Newport along with John Smith, who sailed upriver after they founded Jamestown. The Virginia Convention of 1774, which started forming a body of anti-British sentiment, and they all met there. During the American Revolution, Richmond actually replaced Williamsburg as the state capital, and sadly the town was pillaged by the British under Benedict Arnold in 1781. So we've talked about Benedict Arnold before. This is one story I have always been attracted to. I don't know why. If you've seen the show Turn, also very cool TV show that it goes a lot into turncoats during that time, who obviously were, on both sides trying to get information to George Washington and higher generals, So Benedict Arnold, if you don't know who he was actually a massive hero during the Revolutionary War, but then he actually turned and became a huge traitor to the U.S. He was upset because he felt like he didn't receive recognition that he deserved. In the Revolutionary War, because he was a huge part of it and made some huge differences during that time, but he was so upset about it. So in 1779, he actually started secret negotiations with the British and agreed to turn over the U.S. post at West Point in return for money, and he wanted command of a British army. And so his name, I'm a huge history buff, so Benedict Arnold, his name is known with the word traitor because he was a turncoat that went to the British away from the United States, and he actually died in 1801. So, slave trade there was alive and well, and it was believed to be between 1800 and 1865, and an estimated 300,000 to 350,000 slaves were processed through the Shockoe Bottom, which is a slave auction block in Richmond, and they went through there to make their way to the south. And Shockoe Bottom actually served as a burial ground for thousands of Africans who didn't survive the journey or died shortly after their entry. It's so sad. The city still contributes to, or the city continues to have a hard time with murder and violence. It's actually considered one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. And Richmond's actually gaining a lot of attention from film and TV industry. And they've used the metro region in the past few years for a lot of different things. Even the movie Lincoln, also an amazing movie, was parts of it were filmed in Richmond. Killing Kennedy with Rob Lowe. I've also seen that, and it's really good. And then the show Turn, that I was talking about, it was on AMC when it was on, but it's very good. So before we jump into the cemetery, it's actually called Hollywood Cemetery. Here is a quick word from our sponsor. Thank you guys so much. All right, thank you guys so much. Let's go ahead and talk about the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. So I know there's a lot of Hollywood cemeteries, especially in Hollywood, California, but you will see why this one is named that way. So it was established in 1847 and is still a fully operational cemetery. When Richmond was starting to experience the major effects of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the city was falling victim to the industrialization. So there was a lot of pollution, smog, overpopulation, and a ton of factories that everyone worked in. And then this huge reality started to hit. The existing burial grounds were very overcrowded and very unhealthy. This cemetery is known as a rural cemetery. It's more of like a park or a garden cemetery. And so, the existing burial grounds were other cemeteries. Sorry, I didn't kind of explain that. But Hollywood Cemetery turned into a very safe, sanitary place to bury their loved ones. And because it's like a garden cemetery, there's a lot of restorative benefits of being more in a natural environment instead of just a flat land. So they're surrounded by trees and flowers, and it's very beautiful. And so rural cemeteries were starting to become a huge thing in America, and they actually became public parks. So Richmond is along the bank of the James River and is the capital, like we explained. And this cemetery there spans 135 acres and include valleys, hills, and very huge trees. The beauty of it is very natural and architectural, and it really sets it apart from the like grid-like layout of a lot of other cemeteries. And it's actually registered as a arboretum, which is a place where trees, shrubs, and other plants are cultivated for scientific and educational purposes. So it's a lot more than just a cemetery. It's a garden. It's a place to be researched, and it sounds really cool. And from the pictures, it's very beautiful. So it has been in full operation since the 19th century. It has all kinds of things from lots, crypts, and niches, sure, which are all available for purchase. And, being buried there, you take your place in history because there are presidents buried there, generals, authors, and a lot of famous notable people. So it's the resting place of two presidents, James Monroe, who was the fifth president and last of the founding fathers, and then John Tyler, who was the 10th president. And he was actually, when President William Henry Harrison died in April of 1841, he was the one that caught a cold after his inauguration. John Tyler was his vice president, and so he succeeded the presidency after the death of William Henry Harrison. There are also Confederate state presidents like Jefferson Davis, and it's also the resting place of 28 Confederate generals, which is more than any other cemetery in the country. So the land that Hollywood Cemetery stands on was a part of William Byrd III's estate. And that's like all it said. So I'm like, I don't even know who this person is. So his father, William Byrd II, they said he was a planter, a lawyer, a surveyor, author, and a man of letters. So a big deal at that time. He had inherited his family's estate, which was 180,000 acres of land in Virginia, which is insane, and continued the planter prestige of it. And he was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. And so William Byrd III, after, he was the one who inherited this land. Sorry, I kind of switched and didn't finish what I was saying. But yeah, he inherited his family land, and he then squandered the entire fortune, and he spent it all on building a mansion, which is built, and it's called Westover Plantation, and it's still there today. It's a historical landmark. But William Byrd III had a lot of issues with gambling and bad investments, and then it got to a point where he had to parcel his land that he inherited from his father to raise money to pay for his debts, which is, it's so sad. Like, I keep saying this on this podcast, I'm a huge history buff, so it's so sad to see things like that where, like, he got so in debt, he's just throwing away the history of his father, And sadly, he also had enslaved African laborers on the estate that worked there. So later, that land was owned by the Harvey family, and it was known as Harvey's Woods. And then it went to William H. Haskell, who was the original founder of the Hollywood Cemetery. So in 1847, his friend Joshua Fry and William Haskell proposed the establishment of this rural cemetery near the city. And with the support from the local citizens for this cemetery, it then was, it came to life. June 3rd of 1847, Haskell and Fry purchased that land from Lewis Harvey. So they, like I said, Haskell had become an owner of the land, and they actually purchased it in 1847 for $4,075, which today is about $150,000. So that is not much for that land, And they purchased it to establish a rural cemetery. I already said that. I am so sorry. So it was designed as a garden cemetery or a park cemetery, which was a huge trend at the time, and it was actually borrowed from the French to provide more green space in urban areas. So in the 1840s, Haskell hired a man named John Nodham. He is an architect who created the Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia, and they hired him to design the cemetery in the same rural garden style. They named it Hollywood because of all the holly trees that dotted the hills of the property, because Hollywood, I don't even think was established at that time. Don't quote me on that. And he really wanted to create a space that could allow people to escape from the city, and they could picnic there, meditate, stroll along the pathways because it was right near the James River, and then also spend time with their loved ones that had passed on. When I read that, I still kind of was freaked out. I'm like, I don't know if I would want to be doing all that. Cemeteries creep me out. Burying the bodies creep me out. I'm just a weirdo. But it kind of creeped me out a little bit when I started researching this. So in 1869, there was a 90-foot or a 27-meter high granite pyramid, and it was designed by a man named Charles Dimmick, and it was built as a memorial to the more than 18,000 enlisted men of the Confederate Army that were buried in this cemetery. It was supported by the Hollywood Ladies Memorial Association, which is a group of Southern women who dedicate their life to honoring and caring for burial sites of soldiers. So the pyramid was not like a random choice. And it's not, an homage to the Egyptians. And it is a legit pyramid, but it's an ancient symbol for the end of life. So I'm sorry if my microphone is picking up my dogs barking outside. So the idea of the pyramid was actually inspired by the zodiacal light, or a dim, elongated cone of light that extends sometimes from the horizon into the night sky. I don't exactly know what that means, but that's what it said. And so, oh, I wrote this down. You'd think I'd remember. I wrote these notes like last week, just trying to stay up on notes. And so half the time I forget what I wrote. But here's kind of an explanation of the light that I just told you I didn't understand. So, this is a quote. It's actually a reflection of sunlight from dust particles outside of the Earth's atmosphere. It is best seen at twilight, just as the sun is setting over the Earth. In a similar way, our physical version of a pyramid is meant to symbolize the setting sun of death, as if their lives have reached their own zodiacal light and may now have eternal night. Similarly, for the Egyptians, the pyramid has a symbol of the setting sun and death. Okay, so that makes more sense. I apologize for my brain fart. So another huge piece, other than this pyramid that's a part of the cemetery, is there is a cast iron Newfoundland retriever. So a cast iron dog, and it was placed there in the cemetery to save it from being confiscated by the government during the Civil War. So here's why. During that war, much of the ironwork that was in the city was melted down to use as artillery. So this dog is placed in that cemetery because it belongs to a man named Charles R. Reese. He was a Confederate photographer. I highly recommend looking him up. I had never heard of him, and I looked him up and I was like, oh wow, this is great. Like, they're very cool and unique, and you definitely see a different side of things. I was really impressed. So the dog is placed by what they call a cradle stone. So it looks like a cradle, but it's a headstone because it's for a child. The cradle stone is a symbol of someone who lost their life as a child. They can also be used for adults as a metaphor for sleeping. But the grave belonged to Reese's daughter. So she rests under this constructed cradle. And in February of so here's her story. I'm going back and forth. I'm so sorry. In February of 1862, the 2-year-old named Florence Reese, she perished of scarlet fever. So scarlet fever was very prevalent in the 19th century. And so it's like back then death was, whoa, I just punched my microphone. I'm sorry. I'm talking with my hands, so, death was a huge way of life like then. Today's antibiotic presence here, everything in the, 1900s was fatal. Even a paper cut could kill someone, So Florence, like a lot of other girls that year, died because of this. And so there were so many other little girls buried, so many children buried, that Charles Reese, her dad, really wanted to make her stand out from the crowd in that cemetery. So Florence is the only little girl in the cemetery, or possibly in the United States. That's what it said. With a very distinct statue watching over her. So people all over the world come to see Florence's grave and to take a photo of the iron dog. And they've gained so much attention from that that people will actually come to her grave and leave trinkets for her. And then they will also go around to a lot of the other children's graves and leave things for them. So, and I found these and I wanted to include them. So these are other traditions of people, what they do when they go, like what they leave, or a lot of what their gravestones look at the cemetery. It's very interesting, so I wanted to include this. So for a Jewish tradition, leaving stones is a huge homage to the ancient burial method of placing stones over shallow graves in order to keep the body safe. There are also scallop shells that are like a second appropriate token. They're the symbol of baptism and pilgrimage, and according to Christianity, the scallop shell was used to baptize Jesus by his cousin John. Some will leave coins, and it's a reminiscent of the Greek mythology. Ancient Greeks believed that to be able to reach the underworld, one had to cross the river Styx, which was a gateway between Earth and Hades. And so the dead would need to pay the boatsmen with coins to cross the river. And if you watch too many movies like me, you'll see that prevalent in a lot of things. And then Hollywood was built in a time when churches turned the narratives of resurrection and deliverance. And then with that change, grave markers were a lot more hopeful and pleasant and comforting. So there are ones called tree stones, and it's a grave marker that's carved to look like a tree stump. It's not an actual tree stump. And it came from the Victorian era in the late 19th century. The tree stumps are meant to look like they are chopped and dead. And yet, life still emerges from the tree's decay with mushrooms, which are a symbol of fertility, and carved into the base of the tree stump, these mushrooms. And then there ivy vines that also appear to grow around the trunk. And, ivy is a symbol of immortality. It conveys that although the tree died, it's now supporting a new life, a cycle of rebirth that continued by the death of this individual. Ivy is very common throughout Hollywood Cemetery. Graves are covered by ivy, and one of them is the Confederate General Jefferson Davis's grave. It's also a sign of fidelity, eternity, and it's similar to a laurel plant, which appears on the cast iron gates of Hollywood Cemetery, and that is a huge symbolism of honor, distinction, and achievement. Some other graves appear to have a curtain draped over its head, and it's gorgeous. It's like the curtain is made of stone. It's insane how they did this. But with that curtain, it can be a sign of sorrow and mourning, and the drapes will often have tassels on them, as if the curtain has been pulled over the person's life, signaling the end of their life. And the curtains, some of the time, they look like the curtains in your house that you pull to one side and hook on something. But there's some that look like veils. It's pretty cool. And the really cool part about walking through Hollywood Cemetery is you get a glimpse at a person's life just by how their grave is designed and embellished. It's pretty cool. Some other things, fraternal organizations obviously have their different symbols that will be carved into a grave by members that have passed on, such as the Freemasons, the Oddfellows, Woodmen of the World, and the Sons of Temperance. Also, throughout Hollywood, you can see obelisks on many of the graves, and that can indicate the deceased were Protestants. And they do that because they don't want to be associated with the Great Awakening or Catholicism, because they use crosses on their grave markers while the Protestants use the obelisk instead. And other times, family will mark the graves with very distinct designations of what the deceased accomplished in their life. So one of them, his name is Captain Richard Womack. He is buried in Hollywood, and they erected an obelisk covered with a stone drape. So kind of like what I said earlier about the curtains, or like a veil, is similar to that. And then on the right side of it, a panel is carved out of the stone to depict a ship at sea, forever sailing the waves. I'm gonna try to put the picture on Instagram. I did find it. Now I don't know where it is. Okay, I'll have to look it up. I do know where it is. Google will tell me, guys. Okay. In 1968, James Monroe, at his grave, he has a Gothic Revival cast iron canopy known as the birdcage. And it was registered as a National Historic Landmark by the National Park Service. It is gorgeous. It's really, really cool. I'll definitely put up a picture of that, because I, was doing this research and writing this down and not, thinking about what it actually looked like. But when you look at the picture, it's huge. And it's this just surrounds his grave. It's very, very cool. And a lot that, that recognition was huge for the cemetery. And it's actually became one of the most prominent places to be buried in the state of Virginia. There are other graves that are less adorned, some just carvings, but a lot. Some don't even have carvings or shapes, and that doesn't make them less interesting. But sadly, a lot of those, but even the fancy ones have been vandalized. They're having massive trouble recently with the vandalism in the park, which is so sad. So recently, throughout the years, but a little more recently, not like, I don't know what I'm saying, but through the years, there's been a lot of notable people that have come to rest in the cemetery, including 6 Virginia governors, 2 Supreme Court justices, prominent authors, suffragists, and many loved ones from the Richmond community, who have been there forever. And in 1953, the Hollywood Cemetery Board designated an official list of 49 notables within the cemetery who significantly influenced the course of history due to their actions. It's pretty crazy. There on the ground is the Palmer Chapel Mausoleum, which was built in 1992, and that added 730 more crypts for caskets and 160 cremation niches. Someone correct me. Okay. But there are also other notable legends, because there's massive ghost hauntings there. And there's one that's known as the legend of the Richmond vampire, and we'll get to that one. So Hollywood Cemetery, they say it's full of specters, poltergeists, wraiths, and all manner of things that scare us, So the most notable construction there in the graveyard is a 90-foot stone pyramid that we had talked about earlier. And it's huge. And it was constructed with blocks from James River granite. So a lot of stone. Usually it's limestone, but even granite, it can hold in a lot, you know? And again, it was a memorial to Confederate dead. And there are more than 18,000 soldiers buried there. But historians and archaeologists, believe that there's over 11,000 more. They believe they're cadavers that might still be found and possibly identified. Probably not, but they say that's nearby where the soldiers were buried. The cadavers are a lot of the warriors that were carried from various battles. So including many of the killed in Gettysburg. So if you died on the battlefield wearing a gray Confederate uniform, chances were that your commanding officer would solicit a burial at Hollywood Cemetery. So that monument, the pyramid, took a year to assemble, and of course, full of injuries, a lot of very strange circumstances and odd accidents. And the workers they knew that the task they were on was cursed, and there was no good to come out of it. One of the most legendary accounts of the insanity surrounding the whole building of the pyramid was it had a suicide squad-like work detail. So inmates were actually released from the local jailhouse and were used as manual labor, cannon fodder. I looked it up. And they are soldiers who were regarded as merely material to be expended in war. So nobody cared about them. And so an inmate named Thomas Stanley, he was in because he was a horse thief, and he was a part of this big crew. And so the day that the capstone was supposed to be placed on there, which was known as the proverbial angel on top, no one in the construction group wanted to do it. When they asked if anyone's interested, no hands went up, and Stanley was the one who volunteered for this job. Supposedly it's very perilous. It's very, you know what I mean. Okay. So he climbed the pyramid. I guess he almost broke his neck a couple times, and then he got the stone at the very top. 2 days later, he was transferred, quote unquote, without any indication as to where he went. So you can read the word transferred in two ways. So one, Stanley never made it off the pyramid, as in he died. Or two, the climb was so hair-raising and insane and dangerous that the warden gave Stanley an unofficial pardon for his volunteer. So it's either Stanley died doing all this or he was pardoned and set free. But yeah, that's one of the tales surrounding the pyramid. It's known as an engineering marvel because it has no bonding. All the rocks just are in there together, and it's one of the top 10 tourist attractions in that area. But one of the real appeals of it comes from the fact that it's said to be haunted by those that they are commemorating. There's countless stories of bursts of ice cold air that can be felt along the pyramid's rear wall. There's whispers, and there's just whispers of spirits, and they describe it like this, worming their way into visitors' ears. So kind of just all over the place, and a lot of disembodied moans at dawn and at dusk. And there are also stories around hauntings like Florence's dog, her iron dog, because people will come to pay their respects, and they say they hear the dog barking near Florence. And with people who come to that cemetery with dark motivations and, ill intents, and they have heard a deep growl warning them, go somewhere else. And it's also been said that the dog's position tends to vary. Sometimes he'll be facing the opposite way, things like that. Very creepy. So I mentioned the Richmond vampire, so I wanted to go into that a little bit. It's also called the Hollywood vampire, and it's a recent urban legend. So residents claim that the mausoleum of a man named W. Poole in the cemetery holds the remains of a vampire. So supposedly Poole was run out of England in the 1800s for being a vampire. And so the legend just took fire, circulating around by like the 1960s. And so when you look at the architecture of his tomb, there's both Masonic and ancient Egyptian elements, and the double W's look like fangs. And the cemetery is adjacent to the Virginia Commonwealth University. So the story became really popular among the students, especially in the 1980s and to recent. And it was first mentioned in print in the student newspaper in 1976. Since 2001, the vampire story has become combined with the collapse of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, the railroad's Church Hill Tunnel under Church Hill, which is just a neighborhood of Richmond, where several workers were actually buried alive in 1925. And part of the story showed up online in 2001 and then reprinted in 2007 in, I believe it's a book called Haunted Richmond, The Shadows of Shaco. Sorry. So according to the newer story, the tunnel has awakened an ancient evil that lives under Church Hill. And that is what brought the tunnel crashing down on the workers. So rescue teams found these unearthly blood-covered creatures. Their teeth were jagged, skin hanging from their body, and that creature was crouching over one of the victims. So then the creature escaped from the cave-in and went straight to the James River. The men pursued the creature, but it took refuge in the Hollywood Cemetery. And so they believe it disappeared into a mausoleum that was built, on the hillside with the name W. Poole. According to a man named Gregory Maitland, he's an urban legend and folklore researcher that works with paranormal research groups like Night Shift and the Virginia Ghosts and Haunting Research Society. He says that the creature escaped the tunnel collapse, and they believe it was actually a 28-year-old railroad fireman, Benjamin F. Mosby. So he had been shoveling coal into the firebox of a steam locomotive on a work train with no shirt on when the cave-in occurred and the boiler ruptured. So his upper body was, scalded, his teeth were broken before he was able to make his way through the opening of the tunnel. And say witnesses report that he was in shock, layers of his skin were just hanging from his body, and he died later at Grace Hospital and buried at Hollywood Cemetery. So that's, it's up in the air what you believe. I probably believe in the vampire, but the second explanation makes sense. And so there's another story about an experience that happened at the tomb of President James Monroe. So it was a deputy walking around patrolling the cemetery late at night, and there were a group of officers standing beside the president's grave, looking at, the size of the grave. And the deputy said, he must have been a short son of a, and out of nowhere, a swarm of flies began to attack him, and he fled towards his van, just covered in flies. And so they think maybe the president was a little sensitive about his height. And he also noted another experience near the monument of the Confederate war dead, where he regularly encountered cold spots. And this is kind of the last one, the end of here. Another notable experience was in the cemetery's maintenance shed. The deputy was very sick, and so he was in the shed's bathroom and just vomiting, like he was very sick. And all of a sudden he heard the door open and the sound of footsteps, and the hair on the back of his neck just began to stand up. And he just, yells out loud, "Please leave me alone today, people. I'm not feeling well." And the sensation just completely stopped. Very crazy. So now that I'm done, I realized I should have put more stories in there, but I didn't want to go overboard with things. So this will be a little bit of a shorter episode, probably a good thing. But yeah, that's the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. I hope you guys liked it. I very much appreciate all of the support, guys. Things have been blowing up and been amazing, and I'm just overwhelmed. I looked at numbers yesterday and I started crying. Just this is such a cool experience, and I don't think there was a lot of faith because I do struggle to follow through with things, but I massively enjoy doing this, and so seeing this support is just so overwhelming. I have a whole list of goals that I've set out for the podcast, really trying to put positivity into the air and into the universe, and I already met 2 of them last week, and it was the craziest thing to be a part of, so I just appreciate everyone's support. If you guys have story suggestions, I like to do stories that are not as publicized or in the media or well known. They're just a little overdone. And I listen to a ton of podcasts, what I do all day long. And so, there's a lot that gets repeated. And I understand, they're thrilling episodes, and I still enjoy listening to them to this day. But I really want to do some of the little stuff, the hidden stuff. And so if you guys have story suggestions or want me to check out your town or state to try and find something, let me know. I'm all up for it. So, or if you guys have stories you'd like to send in, I would love to tell your stories over the podcast. But yeah, if you guys would like to follow me, I have an Instagram at Dark Tales from the Road. I have a Twitter, which is at DarkTalesFTR, because they wouldn't let me use my whole name. And there's a Facebook group, Dark Tales from the Road podcast. And I post the same thing on all 3. I'd love you guys to follow all 3, but don't feel like you have to, or just pick one that you guys like the most. If you would like to donate to this show, I would greatly appreciate that. I am trying to save up for a new computer. Usually by the middle or end of the day, my computer is done for. So it's put a damper on researching and recording and editing, I only have a very small time frame before my computer's done for the day. So that's what I'm working on. Everything that's donated will go directly to this show. None of it will go in my pocket. Like even the ads that you guys listen to during the episode, I do earn a very tiny amount from it, but that is also going straight to this podcast, to the computer, all of that stuff. And I hope to definitely up my technology. I need to do some soundproofing, but that's where I'm going with that. So if you'd like to, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/darktales from the road, and you get episodes early. You get them the day early, obviously on Tuesdays, and then you can receive a sticker from me. I've started doing merch, and so I want to, for like the $20 level, to include a free piece of merch on that, because that's a lot, and it's unbelievably generous for someone to do that level. So I definitely want to show my appreciation and love. And so definitely trying to do new things. I'm hoping to start bonus episodes, but that is hard because of my computer situation and just busyness in life. I have a mom of 2 boys, and so it can be a little crazy. But yeah, so I'm trying to definitely add more to that. And the same thing is Buy Me a Coffee. It's similar to Patreon. It's a lot of the same things. The tiers are the same. It's just a different way. If you don't like Patreon, if you want to do a different thing, and you can do a one-time donation, which is Buy Me a Coffee, or you can be a monthly subscriber. And again, there's different tiers on there. The same thing, just preference-wise on what you guys would like to do. And that's buymeacoffee.com/darktales. And I'm trying to get YouTube up and running. I keep starting episodes and then forgetting that I should probably record myself. But I'm scared of YouTube and I don't know how to work it or what to do at all. So, I go support me. I appreciate it. Go into Apple, Spotify, Samsung, any of those, and please rate and review. It just, this all warms my heart, and I love doing this, and I hope you guys are loving it as much as I am. And definitely, I know I haven't been featuring podcasts the last 2 episodes. I'm just kind of taking a break. I did like 3 months solid of doing podcast trailers for you to check out. I will start up that again because I've joined some other networks and falling in love with new podcasts. That's I think that's all for today. I hope you guys have an amazing week, and I can't wait for Halloween. I think that's it. I should probably stop talking now. Thank you all for listening. Definitely go check out all my social media to reconnect. A lot of fun stuff happening. Let's do it, guys. So thank you so much for listening. I can't wait to come back next week. We're going to be in Connecticut learning about Annabelle the doll and the Warrens. So it'll be a fun one. It'll be longer too. Anyways, thank you guys. I don't know how many times I can say thank you, but I appreciate everything. I'm overwhelmed with joy and love, and I'm going to stop now. Thank you. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.